Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.
Hello, and welcome to Champions of Psychology, a show with the goal of openly talking about mental health and gaming, presented by Codename Entertainment and TakeThis.org. Every Tuesday at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on twitch.tv/CNE Games, or later on your favorite podcast service, Mitra Jordan and Raffael Boccamazzo, aka Dr. B, talk about mental health in these unprecedented times, as well as how gaming affects us. If you're here with us live in the chat, you can leave a question that I, Treavor Bettis, might ask them later in the show. But our topic today is going to be burnout. But before that, Mitra, Dr. B, who are you for the fine people who may not know?
So I'm a registered clinical counselor working in Victoria, British Columbia, and I work primarily with adults and adolescents and sometimes families and couples. Basically, I'll work with most people. That's me.
I am Dr. B. I'm a doctor of clinical psychology, and but apparently I'm Mitra today. This is and
Oh, that's the best.
There we
this
go.
is fantastic. Hold on. I'm going to reach to the screen and give you my bow tie, and I need to be more wholesome.
All right,
That's
I flipped
what
you.
I'm gonna
I
do.
flipped you. I got you there.
I
Even when we started this call, I was like, all right, I'm going to move Mitra here because that's correct. It wasn't correct at all.
Well, I saw the chat say, Dr. B and Mitra look different today, and I'm kind of thinking I am wearing my seersucker vest. It's getting warmer. But hi everybody, I'm Dr. B, correctly now, and I'm a doctor of clinical psychology. I'm the clinical director over at a fantastic mental health nonprofit, Take This, expert on the applied use of games in clinical and learning settings. I'm a Leo.
How do you feel about long walks on the beach?
They're sandy. I don't appreciate that. It's a sensory thing.
That's fair. Yeah, so today we're talking about burnout. Woo! Yeah.
Whoa.
So where do you all want to start with this? Should we start with what is burnout for those who may not know? Because some people may be like, why are they talking about a car racing franchise this week? That's different.
I mean, we do have a real breadth of topics here at Champions of Psychology. But,
We opened the show with just Paradise City playing.
I'd watch that.
Oh, boy.
Oh, you want to take this, Mitra, or you want me to take this?
Sure. I think that what is burnout? We talked about this. I'd love for you to define the Maslow model that we talked about yesterday. But generally, burnout is a term that's used very frequently in culture. We use it really casually. We use it to express frustration and exhaustion in the moment. But that doesn't mean that that's all it is. In fact, there's a specific understanding of what the term means. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. B. And then I have some things to say about burnout in culture. So.
Oh, I'm getting ready for this.
Oh, yeah, we're so
We're
ready.
gonna be rich.
Well, so burnout is essentially a chronic psychological condition that it's a relatively new concept by name in the last couple decades. And when we talk about it, often we talk about it just as being overworked and exhausted. And that's an important factor, but that's one of only three factors in the most commonly cited model that I see, which was created by someone named Christine Maslach. Exhaustion's part of it, yes. Overworking is part of it. but so is a sense of ineffectiveness. Maybe you have no sense of control over what you do. Nothing you're going to do makes a difference in your mind. That that's a huge part of this, but also a cynicism, a sort of disconnect, negativity, anger. That it's not coincidental that there is a significant overlap between symptoms of depression and symptoms of burnout, because we've talked about this before. One of the more common models of depression is basically, I suck, the world sucks, and nothing is ever going to change. Well, there's that sense of, I'm useless at my job, I'm ineffective, everything's awful, and I'm overworked. That's what goes into burnout, which is why just taking a vacation doesn't fix it.
Yeah.
Oh, that Sunday night before you go back after a vacation.
Oh, yeah.
Sunday night anxiety.
They could do a whole episode about that one.
Oh, that's a good topic.
Saturday versus Sunday.
So what was it that you wanted to add to that, Mitra?
Okay, so I think part of the challenge with burnout is, of course, the isolation that you feel, and that sense that somehow it's your fault. And I think that burnout or feeling burned out gets really stigmatized. It has this sort of implication that I can't handle things, or you know what, you can't handle it. You can't stand the heat. Get out of the kitchen. You can't cope with this. Oh, maybe you're not cut out to do this job like the rest of us. It's got that kind of feel to it. And so it becomes this burnout is, my problem. Or if it's someone else's, well, that's your problem. Have you tried self-care? And so there's this idea that there's something I should be doing different, as opposed to sometimes burnout is systemic. Like if we look at our healthcare workers right now, you don't think they're probably feeling quite burned out. And I think that makes perfect sense given what they've been through. And so for some people, it can involve experiencing trauma in the workplace as well. For some people, it can be about experiencing systemic racism year after year. Sometimes it's a gender issue. When I worked in professional kitchens, I was often the only woman in the kitchen. And it was exhausting at times just because there was so much misogyny at that point. So you can have all of these contextual and systemic reasons for experiencing burnout. But when we talk about it, or when it's being addressed in terms of self-care, it's often being addressed on the individual level only. And that's one of the reasons it's so hard to overcome.
Absolutely. And that, this is something we talk about in the game industry a lot. One of the things that is known to contribute to a sense of burnout, especially that sense of ineffectiveness and cynicism that I mentioned, is that fairness factor. And if you exist in a system of inequity, there's a reason women are more disproportionately affected by burnout. There's so much disconnect when you don't experience a fit, basically a sense of belonging. We talked about in a previous episode the resilience provided by that sense of belonging. When it comes to the workplace, that sense of distance, that sense of alienation can greatly contribute to burnout. And there's not a whole, like Mitra very wisely brought up, this is part of the reason that burnout solutions that we're given are often ineffective. Yeah, they can work for that exhaustion factor, but they can't fix the system that is leading to burnout. That has to come from the top down.
Okay. So with those things in mind, where do you want to take this conversation from here about what to do with burnout?
Oh God. It's such a huge issue because right now we've got pandemic fatigue on top of everything else.
Yeah.
And there are so many companies. Taking this back a moment, one of the things that Take This does, and I think we do really, really well, is we we do consultation with companies about mental wellness policies, managerial structures, that sort of thing. And there have been numerous companies that I've talked to over the course of the last year, and I've asked them a series of, in my mind, very simple questions. But they're very simple questions that they often don't have answers to, or at least hadn't thought about. And the question is, as we're in the middle of a global generational trauma that will be written about in history books, as we are in the middle of transitioning your company to entirely work from home, which is a new skill set for a lot of people, as we are adding, not changing, but adding parental and educator responsibilities to so many caregivers, as we are adding all of the collective stress of this, have you shifted your expectations of productivity in the workplace? And more often than not, the answer I get is, oh. That in and of itself is telling that people are absolutely going to get exhausted from that, because their entire life has been upended. But also, how many of us, taking this out of the workplace, how many of us are doing what we can to protect others through this pandemic, only to see pictures of people having big weddings unmasked?
Or wearing their masks under their nose. Like,
Right.
I don't understand. Why did you put one on?
Mhm.
I just want to say it's not going to help you.
My wife and I, our wedding anniversary was last Friday. And so we were like, okay, we need to do something that's not in the house. So we got in the car and drove, and we stayed in the car the whole time. And like, we went to one area that had a really nice view of the beach, and I couldn't believe that we got the parking spot that we did. And we sat there and looked over there, and so many people walked by with it under their nose, and I just wanted to shout. I just started shouting at them through the window, like, "Why are you even wearing one? Like, what was the point?" And my wife's like, we're supposed to be having a good time." I'm like, I know. I'm sorry.
Just, I got to give a quick shout out to a buddy of mine, Stephen Machuga, who's the CEO over at Stack Up. And they're a fantastic military-based nonprofit, and they do great mental health services for the military. And he has a big mask that just says, "It goes over your nose." And he just stares at people.
Yeah.
I like that.
I think it's that, I understand that certainly when you're outside, there might be different rules depending on who's around, who's not around about the wearing of masks. And I appreciate that it can be confusing at times. And it's certainly different region to region, depending on how much vaccination, if any. So here in BC, there's the elders are being vaccinated right now, but not really anyone else. Elders, healthcare workers, that's kind of it at the moment as we ramp up to the next phase. So wearing masks is still very, very important, keeping your distance, all of that. But as you say, part of the challenge with all of this is that there is a huge pandemic fatigue, burnout, plus still trying to do other aspects of your life. Plus, the onus is on you, the individual, often to kind of make it work. And as you say, if you're trying to protect more vulnerable family members, that makes it really, really difficult. So, yeah, one of the things that really contributes to burnout is that sense of isolation, not having enough support or understanding around you, not perhaps having enough support from your employers, or enough downtime at home. You might have young children as well, and these are all contributing in a big way.
Absolutely. And one of the things, I'm already seeing this in the chat. In the chat, somebody mentioned after work, who doesn't feel burnt out. I want to make it clear that there's a difference between just kind of feeling exhausted from a hard day of work, which a lot of us feel, sure, especially, if you've got an intense job, it's easy to feel burnout in sort of a colloquial sense. But what we're talking about in terms of burnout is a chronic psychological condition that comes from overwork, that disconnect, that cynicism, and not giving a crap about yourself, your job, anything, as well as a sense of feeling useless or ineffective at work over a long period of time. And that this isn't just, you take a break, you take a vacation, and it's better. This is, as Mitra said, a systemic issue more often than not, at least in my experience.
Yeah, this isn't about I've had a really busy few months at work, or I work as an accountant and it's tax season. This is much more about I just don't feel I can do another day. And I'm not talking about suicidal ideation or thoughts. It's more the sense of I have given everything I can and I am just so wiped out. I just don't even know how I'm going to deal with tomorrow because I'm just so tired. I'm
Yeah.
just so, and it's like a bone deep fatigue that's less in the body and more in the mind and even the heart. So a separate example, I've worked with a number of people who've gone through really, really painful divorce and separation. And it's that place you would get to if you didn't have enough money to pay your lawyer, and you've got, you think you're going to lose your kids, and you're worried about you're going to lose your house too. It's that kind of space. It's you feel this sense of isolation. There's not enough people to help. You feel pushed against a wall, and you feel like you don't have the resources to make that leap to whatever the next level of coping would be.
Going back a little bit to examples you all are given, like it's making me think, like I've talked about on the show the office job that I had that I absolutely hated, and you were talking about like cynicism and hopelessness. I legitimately remember going for a walk with some of my coworkers during our lunch break and and like saying with a laugh, like, oh yeah, if they start doing layoffs, I'm the first to go. Like just straight up, like they need me for this job, but I guarantee you I'm gonna be out first. And I was right, which didn't make that anything better. But yeah, no, like just I had this complete cynicism, like, oh yeah, no, if they start laying people off, I'm out of here, and like just kind of accepting that, and even what you're saying with vacations, where vacations aren't the answer to burnout, like.
When they can be the answer to one piece of
yeah. Like, well, yeah, like overall, because like I would during the vacation time, I'd be like, this is great. I have this weight off my shoulders. Everything is fine. But then, like, yeah, like I was saying, that Sunday night before, I was legitimately having thoughts of like, I could just not go back. Like, I don't want this feeling to stop. I could just not go back, and I'll figure it out, and it'll be fine. And just staying up at night because I did not want to go there so bad that I didn't care how much it would mess with my life. I didn't want to go back there.
Yeah. Yes, that's definitely being burnt out from at least that specific situation. And the other piece is when you find yourself doing all kinds of other things in order to cope with the job. So at one point I worked a job where I was just I felt constantly anxious and unhappy there. And I ended up getting these terrible eczema related breakouts on my hands and my feet. And my hands and feet felt like they were burning all the time. And at that point, I was in food service. So you're working with your hands and you just can't. And it was just awful. But that's how bad it had got, that now I was having to deal with all of the other symptoms related to going into that environment, and I was having to sort of deal with medical, solutions for those symptoms. And I think that that's often a piece of the burnout experience is all of the things that you're doing in order to cope with this environment or situation that's starting to feel really unhealthy for you.
Yeah, and one of the things that I know is talked about in one of the now many books I own on this topic, because it's maybe not coincidental that in the last 2 months we've been getting a lot of requests that take this. Do you have any experience talking about burnout? And well, I'm talking about it tomorrow to a bunch of students as well. But one of the things that was suggested in one of these books is thinking about things from the six factors of contribution. Okay, like breaking it down and what are the things that are contributing to your sense of burnout. Now, workload certainly might be one of them. Okay, if you're having too much work assigned, or if your work is assigned in a way that is not doable for you, it's I've said to people that with autism, especially the way my autism manifests, I would have a very difficult time working in a traditional office job 9 to 5 and thriving, at least without significant accommodations. But a sense of control or autonomy in your workplace can be a big factor as well. I think we've all worked, meaning we've all worked customer service. We've all worked either, customer service, food service, any sort of service-based job. And I think it's a very different experience in having a supportive manager who backs you.
Oh my God.
Against,
yes.
Who is willing to back you against really horrible customers, as opposed to letting them roll all over you. If you have enough of a sense of control that you can go to that manager and say, hey, here's what happened. And they're like, no, I see that. Good. No, I got you. That is a very different experience. But reward is another thing that can contribute to burnout, whether that is monetary rewards or emotional reinforcers. Basically, the job is not feeding your soul, or it's not feeding your pocketbook. In either case, if there's a disconnect between how much work you're putting in versus how much you're getting out of it, whether it's fiscally or emotionally, that can also contribute to burnout. But community is another thing. If you don't fit with the environment, if you feel isolated and alone, like Mitra said, that's another factor. Fairness, we already talked about. It's hard to, again, this is part of the reason burnout disproportionately affects women. Is we live in a patriarchal society. I'm not going to mince words about that. Women are still treated disproportionately badly in the workplace. But also, if there's a value thing, there's also values. If I'm doing a job that does not line up with my values, like if I'm working for a company who does something I hate, and I'm commission based, and I'm going to only get a paycheck if I sell something to somebody that I think is immoral, I'm going to burn out real quickly. So those are the 6 things: workload, control, reward, community, fairness, and values that are that actually same Christine Maslach. I'm basically just reading all of her stuff with some other people co-writing a lot of this stuff. But she suggested thinking about it in terms of those. And once you can break it down to which of those is contributing to your burnout, well, that gives you an idea of what the solutions may be, whether it's systemic or it's individual.
Yeah. Wow. That was fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, when I work,
I've been reading.
Yes. And it's a boon for all of us. It's true. But yeah, when I work with people, it's often, it always is at least one of those things, if not more of them, because often it's not just one, right? You're feeling a lack of financial reward. Maybe you're also feeling a lack of safety in the workplace, or a lack of fairness in terms of equality. So yeah, I was going somewhere with that. ADHD.
ADHD brain. Yeah, there we go. Yep. It makes an appearance every episode.
Right
either you or me or both.
Don't leave me out of it.
I wasn't last week where all 3 of us did. It was fantastic. It was great. Yeah, there is one other part of this I want to get to, but when you talked about the supportive manager, like that hit me in the soul. Like going from an office where I was not trained at all, and then they yelled at me for not getting work done, to which I then reminded them they hadn't showed me how to do, to which they then told me was my fault, to going to working at a bookstore where I had a manager that was probably the nicest, most supportive person I've ever worked for in my life. And like my numbers for what we calculate started going down. And he was like, hey, I know you're a good worker and this isn't out of the norm. What is it something that's going on with, like, am I not helping you the way I need to? And him saying, I was just like, what? What? It's what? But there's a part of this that I didn't want to get to because it brought up some good stuff yesterday in our meeting. What's the magic question, and what does that have to do with burnout?
Oh man.
It is. Hold on. Before Mitra goes on a wonderful Mitra rant about this, I have to say when properly applied, I remember using this when I worked with people, and when properly applied, it's a great tool, but it is the stupidest name. That is the technical name for this technique. It is actually called the magic question, and every psych grad student knows this. Hey, Mitra, what do you have to say about the magic question?
Hey, Mitra.
Oh no, go for it.
Oh, you want me to get into it now?
Oh, we do.
Okay, you don't want to explain further what the magic...
Oh, okay, yeah, so...
Do you want to just... I know, let's get you to do this, because yesterday, where we started off, sorry, we always do a sort of conversation before the stream about where we're going.
Mm-hmm.
Yesterday was, I think I asked Treavor a good question, which then devolved, moved.
Yeah.
So I think, Treavor, you'd mentioned the awful job, and I said something like, so okay, so it's really not coming. If something were, if you were to look at your life, what was it that, and you were to know that things were better, what would you notice? What's the first thing that would be different, right? At which point you jumped in with, ha-ha! A magic question. Like,
to which me, playing the role of Treavor, went, what?
What?
He's brilliant in the role.
So how's about we define that magic question, and you so beautifully set it out yesterday.
So
sure everybody wants to know.
The magic question is something that's used in a very brief form of therapy called solution-oriented therapy. And the magic question is designed to get you to think about solutions and actionable steps and differences in your environment and directions that you can go in. But when misapplied, it just sounds really patronizing. Really patronizing. But the question is this. So Treavor.
Hi.
Hey. So let's say you go to bed tonight, and in your sleep, something comes along and magically solves all your problems. Just boom, critical role. All your problems are solved. But you don't know it because you're asleep. Now, when you wake up tomorrow, what are you going to notice that's different in you, that's different in your environment, that's different in how other people are acting towards you? What's going to be different that lets you know all of your problems were solved?
And see, when you ask this, my first instinct was to go, everything. I just
Well,
noticed everything, and explaining it like I hate to make this a comical joke, but like if I legitimately try to picture that in my head, it just turns my vision into like a Disney film. Like there's birds flying through, singing and stuff. Like everything is great, and I like trying to get it serious. I don't know, and I think that's one of the annoying things about like anxiety and depression is you don't always know what it is.
Right. So now if you were to go through this whole magic question thing seriously, they'd have you say, okay. So you walks into your bathrooms. I mean, they wouldn't say it like that. And you notices yourselves in the mirrors.
Where is this therapist from?
This therapist is Gungan, I think.
Where did I go to find this therapist?
A galaxy far, far away.
Oh, very far very far. But you goes into the bathrooms and you notice your toothbrush is different. No, it's just that it does. They actually do get into the specifics about what's the first thing you notice, what's the second thing you notice, what's the third thing you don't, and part of the challenge with it, from where I sit, is that it can be such a freaking disrespectful question. And it's just that it seems like, just in solution focused brief therapy, what happens is it feels like this is your hammer and everything is a nail. And I'm talking about when it's misapplied. And this is why I get so irritated, because in my training, I remember watching this role play and I remember feeling like, oh God, I'm dying. Like, here's this person and they've got so many challenges that they're experiencing. And at no point does it feel like the therapist is validating their experience at all. You very quickly get into this like, oh yeah, I hear, that's kind of tough. So how would you like things to be different? It's like, did you hear anything I said? And of course, the problem is it's very individually based as opposed to being contextually based.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, what would be different in my life? Well, as you say, it's like, well, if I woke up the next morning, maybe there'd be love in my life, or maybe there'd be a boss who appreciated me, or maybe there'd be, it's like magic, and it's like unicorns, and it's like rainbows. And of course, that's not actually the purpose, and that's not really what's useful about therapy. I will say this is a question that, when applied correctly, can be very, very useful.
Okay.
That doesn't mean I don't have a hate on.
Well, when misapplied, it really does have that sort of Mr. Mackey school, really bad school counselor kind of vibe to it. And I hate it when school counselors get ripped on, even though I just kind of did, because they're so wonderful. I love all the school counselors in my life. But the stereotype is just so awful.
Oh, it really is. There was a piece that you'd said yesterday that I thought was kind of quite useful in some ways. You say many useful things. This is not
I was like, wait a minute, but it was completely useless in other contexts.
In other contexts, throw it in the sea.
Throw it in the sea.
In the sea.
That's how I'm just going to describe getting rid of stuff now. Where'd the set of spoons go? I threw it in the sea.
Yes, for us coastal people, it's kind of handy. So, when you mentioned the magic question, you were asking it of Treavor. One of the things you said was, one of the things you'd said yesterday, was, when you wake up, because you will have been asleep, you will not have noticed any of the changes. And that's a key part, so that when you get up, if things were different, what would you notice? And of course, the purpose of this, and it can be asked in so many ways. I remember one therapist saying, I ask this of people when they first come to see me, and it goes like, so if at the end of our work together, you feel done and you're leaving and you feel like your life is better, what would you be thanking, not me, the therapist, but what would you be grateful for? What would you be really happy about that was different? So people find all kinds of ways of saying this magic question. They're not always asking it directly in the, you're asleep, and then when you wake up, unicorns, rainbows, it's perfect, but they're finding these more subtle ways to say, if things were better, what else would be happening? What would be part of the better? The challenge again with all this is the individual nature of the question. We're not really addressing context and societal influences or effects on our life. So
yeah.
Well, and that's back when I was the therapy given person.
Really fits the vest you're wearing.
Yeah, right.
Oh, back in the days when I was a therapy kind of person. Now, when people would bring up that things would be different, or God, I don't even know where to begin. That was always a really interesting opportunity for empathy. Because I remember saying this on numerous occasions. So The stuff that is really overloading you is the stuff that isn't in your control. So it's going to be hard. You're overwhelmed to find a solution, an individual solution to stuff that you don't have any control over.
Yeah.
What you're talking about is everything in your environment and nothing with you. And that would bring a whole new spin on it, talking about, being able to empathize with the fact that there were all these systemic factors that were overloading this. I mean, overloading the person. I often worked with autistic teens, and as I've said on numerous occasions, being autistic myself, we exist in a world not built for us. We're Linux in a Windows world, and we're expected to be Windows. It just doesn't work. That in and of itself creates social burnout often. Burnout is not a thing that is, as far as I know, not a thing that is necessarily isolated to the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. We can be functioning in other contexts and burnt out in others. So, for example, somebody who's experienced a lot of issues around race. I think last time when we were talking about the question of where are you from, or the question of that sense of belonging, you can feel very burnt out on that stuff. You can feel very tired of trying to explain or express your position or your experience to people, right? As well, but you might feel fine going to your job. You might feel good in that bookstore. It might not be affecting other aspects of your life as much. You might go to work and feel burnt out, but you might feel quite rested coming home. So it can eventually, of course, it will eventually affect other aspects of your life. So that's part of how we make sense of whether it's happening for us, actually, is to pay attention. Where am I feeling fatigued? What can I cope with? What sorts of breaks can I take? Because we want to try and not get to that burnout point place.
Let's take a quick break. Remind viewers and listeners of our disclaimer for the show, as read by the lovely Lauren Urban, who is moderating today. And thank you, Lauren, for doing that.
Listen this time.
Okay, here we go.
Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.
I'm going to put that on before I go to sleep. That's just going to lull me to sleep, is that disclaimer.
Listening to Lauren read the things I write.
Yeah. So we are getting, in the latter half of the show. Do you want to talk, because we have on the list of things is EAPs. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure, we can talk briefly about them.
Okay.
I mean, I think they're a useful thing for people to know about. So sometimes when people are having challenges either in the workplace, or sometimes it's just to do with a life event that's really challenging, like a death, for example. So someone in your HR department might suggest you contact an EAP. So that is your Employee Assistance Program. And we have them in both Canada and in the US. And if you call your employee assistance program, so you have one of two things. Some places have an employee assistance program. Some will just give you a health benefit, a certain amount of money towards seeing a therapist, which that's great, because then you get to see the therapist of your choosing. And you can see them for as long as you like, and your work environment or your insurance will cover about, say, $500 is quite common, actually, where I live. I don't know how much is common where you are. And of course, in some places in the world, we are able to get that kind of health coverage indefinitely. but that's very rare.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, if you end up having an employee assistance program at your employment, there are some cautions around that people often don't know. Shall I go into those, or do you have?
Oh no, please.
Okay, then fine.
Hey,
But
Treavor, are we
interrupt
ready
if
for
there's
this?
anything different.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, let's do it.
Yeah. Okay, no, go, Mitra, go ahead. We're ready.
We're ready.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
We're here for
no.
it. Yep. Just go ahead.
All right. In case you've noticed, my fine companions here think I might have an issue or two with employee assistance.
Oh no, we're not. You know, we're just here. Don't mind us. You do you.
No, you keep going. You've got great things to say. This is awesome.
All right. So I have several beefs, obviously, with employee assistance programs.
They're good ones too.
Beef number one, in Canada, you contact your employee assistance program. They line you up with a therapist. There's things they don't tell you that you need to know. Thing one, the employee assistance program has contracted the therapist to work with you for the duration of the program, but not after. Generally, the contract will stipulate that therapist actually can't see you beyond the confines of the program. So you meet a therapist you really like, and you go, oh, you can see me for, say, 6 sessions through this program. I would love to hire you privately after that. Good luck to you. You can't do that. That's not part of the contract. That's the first thing that irritates me. The second thing that really annoys me is you're not told that you have a limit of 4 to 6 sessions, and that if you want more sessions with this person, you usually have to reapply. Now, sometimes that's not a problem, but your therapist will have to fill out a bunch of paperwork as to why you want more sessions, and some of this paperwork may or may not get back to your employer. They say that it's confidential, but I have had many therapists I've known personally who've talked to their employee assistance clients and said, okay, I'm going to be very careful filling out this paperwork. What do you want me to say? And I've had some clients who've been really afraid to go see therapists on employee assistance programs, depending on the reason they're there. So, for example, if someone is experiencing a lot of fatigue at work or a workplace injury, they might be really afraid of talking honestly with the therapist about how well they're feeling or how ill they're feeling because of how this may get interpreted in their workplace. Confidentiality is supposed to be airtight, but the challenge with being a therapist who works through employee assistance is that you actually are working for 2 people. You are contracted by the employee assistance program. You are working on behalf of your client. These 2 things can get very muddy. And as someone who's done supervision of those therapists, I can tell you firsthand that it can be a very difficult path to walk. And I can also tell you, I will never work for an EAP. So I think that's basically the gist of it.
Well said.
Did I miss anything in the rant?
It's a good rant.
Yesterday?
Uh-huh.
Excellent.
Yeah, no.
So that's where I really feel that the EAPs are not in service of the client, and nor are they in service of the therapist, and that's a real problem. So.
Well, and that's often a complaint that people have about human resources as well. That the HR department is very often there to protect the company and not the employee.
Yep.
Yes.
And that's a problem when they're the ones that can be a problem. I should say it's not always a problem because like anything, there are differences at different companies, and in large companies, there's even differences within teams. So some are more altruistic than others, but one of the things that some of the researchers on burnout talk about is the idea of, there might be individualized solutions for you to do to take time off or have accommodations, but there's also still internalized and societal stigma against disabilities in the workplace, that you're not pulling your weight. And that is that is another systemic issue. And we see this with mental health accommodations as well.
All the time.
All the time. Well, and I've talked about this personally, I think on the show, that, there exists, especially during the pandemic, like Costco. For me, Costco is the first circle of autism hell. And I get panic attacks a lot of the time going to Costco because they change where everything is.
Oh God.
People are going in every directions with heavy carts. There are children running around me. I'm trying to pay attention to my shopping list while looking around at all this stuff. And there are people offering samples. It's an overstimulation nightmare. And there are times for like going to Costco if you have some sort of accessibility issue or vulnerability due to the pandemic. And I didn't go and utilize that, which is my legal right, because the panic attacks are easier than having to explain disability to people when I am able-bodied.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And that is a huge obstacle to addressing some of this stuff in the workplace, is that internalized sense of stigma.
Yeah.
Yes,
Stigma
absolutely.
on burnout, I think is a big one. One of them that I talked about yesterday, I wanted to bring up was like, there is a stigma in against certain type of jobs. Like, say you work at IGN and you review games, and you're like, man, I'm feeling really burned out on this. Like, I'm not getting the same thing I did out. And people are like, but you play games for a living. And it's like, well, no, that's the thing. That is their living. That is their job. They have to hit a deadline on that game that about, 45 minutes in, they're like, crap, I kind of hate this. And they got to get through it. Same thing with Twitch streamers and whatnot, is like, people experience burnout. They're like, but you play games and just sit. But no, because I think about this. You like I said, with the whole like Twitch being like a Comic-Con panel, you're there with everyone's eyes on you, which is stress inducing enough. And then there's everything else on top of it.
Yeah, and that actually really relates to streamers and Zoom fatigue. So
Mm.
there's research recently out of Stanford about Zoom fatigue and what's happening with that in terms of how we are as embodied people and why we might be finding Zoom particularly stressful.
Hmm.
And so that's really contributing to a lot of burnout, both in the workplace and, of course, for anyone who's a real, trying to establish a presence on social media, makes it even worse. So the first one is we're not used to seeing ourselves on camera.
Hmm.
And that's actually a source of fatigue. Because now we're managing the mental load of not only the other people that we're having conversations with, but also how do I feel about seeing
Hmm.
myself on camera? It's this kind of critical feedback loop, and it adds to the mental load we experience in conversations. Um, and then when you're on a video chat, you're not as mobile because that's distracting to the conversation. So you're finding yourself sitting more still, which isn't a natural state for
Hmm.
our bodies. So that really contributes. And also, we actually look away a lot when we're talking in person because eye contact is actually really activating. We use the word arousing and take your minds out of the gutter. Oh,
No,
arousing,
I was thinking I'm autistic. I definitely
Yeah.
don't look people in the eyes a lot.
Right? But then when you're on camera and you feel to some degree that you kind of have to in order to feel a connection with your audience, that adds to the stress that that certainly we experience. And then also faces in camera can be much closer up, and that can be really stressful to people because it's not the typical distance that we would normally experience when talking to people. So it feels like a bit of an invasion in terms of personal space.
Hmm.
So anyway, I mentioned that because it really does relate to burnout, particularly at this point.
Yeah. So again, we're now closer to the end of the show, but we got a few questions that came up in chat that I think would be good. Let's see which one. Oh, this one came up earlier. Dr. B mentioned it briefly. This is Calico Shadow says, is there such a thing as educational burnout? Like going to school so long that you just can't get motivated to do anything school-wise? That laugh.
Laughs in grad student. I don't know about you, Mitra, but everybody I went to school with, especially by the end,
Oh, yeah.
when you think about especially graduate school, but even college, you don't have a whole lot of control over what you have to learn, and some of it may be boring. Some of it's definitely boring.
Statistics.
Yeah. But you still have to learn it. And as one of my psych professors in grad school said, if we gave things to you at a reasonable pace, you'd be here for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so they know it's way too much information. And so, I mean, if we think about school as a workplace setting, then absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is.
And I think it's also exhausting because not only are you supposed to take it in at a rapid rate, but then you're also supposed to find coherent ways to actually express it, spew it out, as it were, also at a rapid rate. And that level of continually having to perform is exhausting. So it absolutely relates to workplace and educational experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I have a really good friend who is getting her doctorate right now and is also teaching as part of that program. And so I'm witnessing her having the student and the teacher stress at the exact same time. And I'm always trying to be like, are you okay? You need to talk? You good?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm gonna call this out. Monkey House, you put a really good question in the chat, and I'm actually gonna bring up to the other two here later about possibly making that next week's episode. So we'll get back to that one. But Grimmer then said, question: the discussion has talked a lot about coping strategies on behalf of the person experiencing burnout. What other ways can people identify environments that are either negative or positive?
I think the book that I brought, since I've got a good chunk of my burnout books right here because I knew I would be going to at least one of them. The book that really I think lays it out nicely in terms of accessibility and factors to consider is Banishing Burnout by Michael Leiter and Christina Maslach, and that's the one that goes through the 6 things I mentioned earlier about, is this a community fit? Is this a fairness fit? Is this a values fit? Is this a workload fit? And so, yeah, those are things to consider, because some of them may, if you've got a values fit, but you're overworked and you feel isolated, then that's going to be a different set of solutions than someone who, is low on all 6 of those factors.
Yeah, I think that something that's really important that we need to take into account is sometimes you're just feeling fortunate to find work, right? And it is work that may eventually lead to burnout. But I think being aware of that at the beginning of that particular journey might help, because we know that we aren't always in a place in our lives to choose the experiences that we have in terms of our work. Like, we just need a job.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I remember working for this company where you call up about magazine subscriptions. You sit in a room and you do the telemarketing I just remember thinking, oh God, the first day I walked in, this is going to be awful. And it's definitely going to lead to my hating everyone and myself for being here. But at the time, I really needed work. And so you just kind of have to be honest with yourself about where this could go, and maybe think about what your exit strategy would be. And having an exit strategy, knowing that, okay, I think I can hack this for 3 months. What am I going to do in the meantime? That can actually be a help in terms of environment.
That's got
knowing there's an end is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that has definitely gotten me through some jobs and stuff. Like, all right, I'm going to make a plan. I'm going to stick to the plan, and that's how I'm going to get out of this.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that is going to do it for today's episode. Mitra, Dr. B, where can people find you online?
Well, I'm at mitrajordan.com, and my Twitter handle is at mitrajordan, and I am very available on both. So.
And if you follow me on the socials right below at the Dr. B with 2 E's, and spell out doctor. It's kind of like that Dr. Nick joke, Doctorb. But
I want to sing every time I hear it. You're
The Dr. B.
It is, I'm not just the Dr. B, I'm the Dr. B. There's an added level of pretension.
Yeah, you can find me on the Difficulty Class podcast and on Champions of Lore here on twitch.tv/CNE Games every Monday at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and also on Twitter at the Treavor. There is an A hiding in there. Thank you to Lauren for moderating today and getting those questions in there and taking care of the chat. Thank you very much for that. And thank you to Codename Entertainment. Well, and also thank you, Lauren, for reading and doing that amazing disclaimer. I mean, I should be doing that every episode. Just thank you that, because that's amazing and fantastic. But also thank you to Codename Entertainment and Take This for giving us an opportunity to have these discussions. If you missed any part of today's show, you can listen to it later as a podcast on any of your favorite podcast services at 2 p.m. And if you have any suggestions for future topics, you can send them into championsofpsychology@codenameentertainment.com. If you're live with us right now, be sure to come back at 1 p.m. for Bardic Inspiration with Dylan and Jason Miller. And I believe Luke Gygax is the guest today.
Oh, cool.
I believe that's right. I'm pretty sure that's right. Yeah, no. Lauren will correct me if that's wrong. But that's happening at 1, so that's going to be a blast. But yeah, thank you to everyone for watching and listening. And until next week, take care of yourself.
Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.